The invitation arrived on a Tuesday, nestled between a utility bill and a glossy catalog for minimalist furniture. It was thick, cream-colored cardstock, the kind of paper that whispers of expense and occasion. Northgate High School 10-year reunion. My first instinct was to burn it, to watch the embossed letters curl into black ash and disappear, just as I had tried to make my memories of that place disappear. For 10 years, Northgate High had been a crater in my past, a place I walled off and refused to acknowledge. It was a 4-year exercise in systematic humiliation, orchestrated by a select few and silently co-signed by the many. A ghost in the halls, that's what they called me. Something to be seen through, hesperied about, and occasionally tormented for sport. But this was more than just a standard invitation to suffer through stale hors d'oeuvres and forced conversations with people who never knew I existed. Tucked inside was a second, smaller card, a letter from the reunion committee. My eyes scanned the professionally printed lines, my heart beginning a slow, heavy drumbeat against my ribs. ... Honored if you would be our guest speaker. A testament to the incredible success our alumni can achieve. Your groundbreaking work in neurolinguistic programming. An inspiration to us all. An inspiration. The word was so absurd, so utterly disconnected from the reality of my time there, that I almost laughed. They didn't want Mara the ghost. They wanted Dr. Mara Vance, the name they'd read about in tech journals and alumni newsletters. They wanted the polished, successful product, with no interest in the brutal factory conditions that had created her. My phone buzzed. A picture message from Chloe, my only friend from that time, my only friend still. It was a photo of her own invitation, held up by a hand giving a rude gesture. The caption read, "You got one of these?" I say we skip it and go get tacos instead. Unless you have a sudden desire to see if Genevieve's nose has collapsed from the sheer force of her own superiority. Genevieve. The name still landed like a shard of ice in my gut. Genevieve Dubois. Elegant, powerful, and decadent in her cruelty. She was the architect of my high school misery. It wasn't just mindless bullying. It was an art form to her. She was a master of the quiet word that could ruin a reputation the calculated exclusion that could make a person feel utterly alone in a crowded room. She never laid a hand on me. She didn't have to. Her power was atmospheric, poisoning the very air I breathed. I remembered the book, my freshman year literature project, a detailed analysis of recurring motifs in Gothic literature, something I had poured my entire soul into for months. I had left it on my desk for 5 minutes. When I came back, Genevieve was standing nearby with her court, talking about a party. My notebook was in the trash can, its pages soaked with the remains of her strawberry yogurt. She didn't even look at me. She just laughed with her friends and walked away, leaving me to pull my ruined work from the garbage, the sting of humiliation so sharp it felt like a physical blow. They want me to be the guest speaker, I texted back to Chloe. Her reply was instantaneous. A string of shocked emojis followed by nitrogen monoxide. You're kidding, after everything. That takes a level of obliviousness I didn't think was humanly possible. You're going to say no, right? I stared at the invitation in my hand. My analytical mind / the mind that now designed complex language models and predictive algorithms began to process the data. The request was an insult, a symptom of a collective amnesia that allowed them all to sleep at night. They had erased the ghosts from their memory. They had forgotten a girl with yogurt-soaked dreams. And in that moment, a cold, clear purpose began to crystallize within me. Revenge had never been my goal. My goal had been to escape, to build a life so far removed from theirs that their opinions, their very existence, became statistically insignificant. I had succeeded. I had a life they couldn't touch. But they had reached out. They had sent an invitation. They had presented me with an opportunity I had never known I wanted. They wanted a speech about success, an inspirational tale. I would give them a speech, all right, but it wouldn't be the one they were expecting. For 10 years, I had been the ghost. Now, they were inviting me back to the scene of the crime. It was time for a haunting. I'm thinking about it. I texted Chloe. It was a lie. My decision was already made. The weeks leading up to the reunion were a deep dive into data retrieval. My work had made me an expert at finding the patterns in the noise, at excavating truth from mountains of information. I applied that expertise to the graduating class of Northgate High. I was not preparing a speech. I was preparing a final report. I resurrected our old, forgotten social media groups. I sifted through a decade of public posts, job updates, wedding announcements, and tagged photos. I built a network map of their lives / a complex web of connections, successes, and most importantly, failures. It was a digital ethnography of the people who had once made my world a living hell. Chloe, despite her reservations, became my willing accomplice. Her memory for gossip and social dynamics was a perfect analog complement to my digital analysis. Remember Mark Renshaw? She said over the phone one night, the guy who accidentally tripped you in the cafeteria so you spilled your entire lunch tray on yourself? Vaguely, I said, pulling up his profile. A smiling man with a wife and 2 kids, posing in front of a heavily mortgaged suburban house. What about him? His landscaping business just went under, Chloe said, a note of grim satisfaction in her voice. Took a big loan for a bunch of new equipment right before that huge drought last summer. Wiped him out. He's working at a big box hardware store now. I made a note. Another data point. One by one I compiled the stories. The class president who was on his 3rd divorce. The star quarterback who had blown out his knee and now sold insurance. The valedictorian who had suffered a nervous breakdown in law school. These weren't stories of failure to be gloated over. They were just life. The messy, complicated, disappointing reality that comes for everyone. The reality they had all been so sure I would be crushed by while they soared. But my primary target per my main query was Genevieve. On the surface, her life looked perfect. She had married a wealthy investment banker right out of college. Her social media was a curated masterpiece of charity galas European vacations and perfectly filtered photos of her 2 angelic-looking children. She was the chair of the reunion committee, of course. Still the queen bee, still orchestrating the social lives of everyone around her. But as I dug deeper, I found the cracks in the facade. Her husband's investment firm was under federal investigation for securities fraud. It wasn't public yet, but the digital chatter in certain financial circles was deafening. I found whispers of her own addictions / discreet visits to high-end rehab facilities disguised as wellness retreats. One found the court documents from a lawsuit filed by a former nanny, detailing abusive behavior and emotional instability. The perfect life was a lie, a carefully constructed illusion, just like the effortless superiority she had projected in high school. She wasn't a goddess on a throne. She was just a person / drowning in a sea of quiet desperation, working furiously to keep her head above water. And she was planning a party, a grand celebration of her own perceived success, where she intended to have the ghost she'd created perform as the opening act. The plan for my speech began to form. It would not be a screed of angry accusations. That would be too easy, too satisfying for them. It would give them the drama they craved, allow them to dismiss me as a bitter, vengeful woman. No, my revenge would be colder, quieter, more analytical. I would not talk about myself at all. I would deliver a speech about them. I would tell a story. The story of a generation illustrated with a few carefully chosen, anonymous examples. A story about the illusions we construct and the quiet, messy truths they hide. I would speak about the high school quarterback who learns the true meaning of strength, not on the field, but when he's comforting his sick child. I would speak of the popular girl who discovers that kindness is a greater currency than popularity. I would speak of the striving businessman who finds that integrity is more valuable than profit. Every story would be true, and every story would be aimed like a rifle at a specific person in that room. I would not use names. I wouldn't have to. They would know, and they would know that I knew. And for Genevieve, for the grand finale, I would end with a story about a woman who seemed to have it all: a perfect family, a perfect life. A woman who teaches us all that the most important foundation to build is not the one others can see, but the one you build within yourself. A foundation of honesty, of self-respect, of a quiet, unshakable integrity, everything she didn't have. I would praise the illusion she had built while simultaneously exposing its hollow core to the entire world without ever mentioning her name. I would give her the public humiliation she had so expertly dished out to others, but wrapped in the pretty paper of an inspirational speech. They would all applaud her downfall, thinking they were applauding a virtuous ideal. It was a flawless, elegant, and deeply cruel piece of social engineering. It was my masterpiece. The night of the reunion arrived. Chloe and I got ready at my hotel suite. She was a bundle of nervous energy. I was preternaturally calm. I felt like a surgeon before a complex operation. All emotion was set aside, replaced by a cold focus on the task ahead. I chose my dress with care, the cobalt blue one, a color of power and serenity. My hair and makeup were flawless. I was the image of success they had requested. The perfect Trojan horse. Are you ready for this? Chloe asked, her voice soft. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. The ghost was gone. In her place stood a woman who understood the true nature of power. It wasn't about being the loudest voice in the room. It was about knowing the truth and deciding exactly when and how to reveal it. They planned a party, I said, a slow, cold smile spreading across my face. It would be rude not to give them a night to remember. This response provides the next major installment of our collaborative novel. My bullies planned to humiliate me at our reunion. I was the guest speaker. The narrative follows Mara as she arrives at the reunion, confronts figures from her past, and prepares to deliver her highly anticipated speech. The ballroom of the Grand Excelsior Hotel was a cacophony of manufactured joy. A hired DJ played painfully nostalgic music from a decade ago, the bass line a dull, repetitive thud against my ribs. People were clustered in tight, loud groups, shouting over the music, their faces flushed with alcohol and the desperate need to perform their success. It was exactly as I had pictured it, a petri dish of insecurity and faded glory. Wow, Chloe breathed, her eyes wide as she took in the scene. It's like a living, breathing social media feed. Everyone's smiling, but their eyes are screaming for validation. She squeezed my arm. Okay, battle plan. We hit the open bar, find a dark corner, and you practice your speech on me until it's time to unleash hell. I smiled faintly. No need. The speech is already compiled and ready to execute. My gaze swept the room per my mind, working not with emotion, but with the cool, detached process of facial recognition software. I was tagging and flagging. Mark Renshaw, leaning against a bear, a little heavier, his smile a little too forced. Jessica Wu, former head cheerleader, now looking tired as she showed off pictures of her toddlers to a bored-looking audience. They were all here. My test subjects, my data points. We had barely taken 10 steps into the room when the first one approached. A woman with a bright, brittle smile I vaguely recognized. Oh my God, Mara, she gushed. Mara Vance, It's me, Tiffany. We had chem together. I had no memory of her. She was part of the vast neutral territory, the silent majority who had watched from the sidelines. Her amnesia was a shield, protecting her from any complicity. Tiffany, I said, my tone pleasant and neutral. It's been a while. You look amazing. She continued, her eyes scanning my dress, my hair, my shoes, in a rapid, calculating appraisal. We all saw that article about you in that business magazine. Something about brainwaves. Neurolinguistic programming, I corrected gently. My firm does data analysis for emerging markets. We just closed a major project in the Philippines, actually. Very complex demographic. Work, wow, that sounds so important, she said, her smile faltering slightly, having no real framework to understand what I did. All she understood was that it was successful. That was all that mattered here. After another moment of awkward pleasantries, she excused herself to refill her drink, her mission of greeting the guest of honor complete. She didn't have a clue who you were a month ago, Chloe muttered as soon as she was out of earshot. Now she'll tell everyone you're best friends. Next came Mark Renshaw. He saw me and his face lit up with the aggressive friendliness of a salesman. He settled over, a half-empty beer bottle in his hand. Vance. Holy cow, look at you, he said, his voice a little too loud. Guest speaker, huh? That's wild. Man, high school feels like a million years ago, right? We were all such jerks back then. He laughed, a clumsy attempt at a shared self-deprecating joke. This was a critical moment, a test of my new programming. The old Mara would have frozen, stammered, or simply endured the interaction. But I was no longer running on that old code. I met his gaze with a cool, placid look. Were we? I asked, tilting my head slightly. I confess my long-term memory allocation for that period is primarily focused on coursework and extracurriculars. I found cafeteria dynamics to be a poor return on investment for my cognitive resources. His smile faltered. The words were polite, but the meaning was clear. You were so insignificant to me, I don't even remember your petty transgressions. He blinked, confused, the joke landing with a thud at his feet. He mumbled something about getting another beer and made a hasty retreat. Chloe looked at me with newfound awe. Okay, she whispered, you've officially terrified me. That was like watching a butterfly use advanced calculus to dismantle a charging rhino. But I wasn't here for the rhinos. I was here for the queen of the jungle. And just then, the crowd parted slightly, and I saw her. Genevieve Dubois was holding court near the center of the room. She was flawless, as always, dressed in a shimmering, champagne-colored gown that probably cost more than my first car. Her blonde hair was swept up in an elaborate style, her smile bright and dazzling. She was a star, radiating confidence and a sense of effortless command. But I could see the data points she couldn't hide. The slight tremor in the hand that held her champagne flute, the faint, almost imperceptible lines of tension around her eyes, the way her gaze flickered around the room a little too quickly, constantly assessing, constantly ensuring she was still the center of her universe. She was working hard. She saw me. Her smile widened, and she began to move toward. You, a predator gliding through her territory. Mara, she called out, her voice a perfect melody of warmth and excitement. She moved past Chloe as if she were a piece of furniture and enveloped me in a brief, airlight hug that smelled of expensive perfume. You came, and you look absolutely stunning. We are all just so incredibly, incredibly proud of you. The possessive pronoun was a deliberate choice. We, as if my success was a community project she had graciously overseen. Genevieve, I said, my voice equally pleasant, my smile a carefully constructed mirror of her own. Thank you for the invitation. It's a beautifully organized event. The logistics must have been a significant undertaking. Oh, It was a nightmare, but it's all worth it to see everyone together again, she said, waving a dismissive hand. She placed her hand on my arm, a gesture of ownership. I have to tell you, when your name came up for guest speaker, I was your biggest champion. I told everyone Mara Vance is the perfect example of what Northgate can produce. You were always so quiet and brilliant. I knew you were destined for something special. The lie was so audacious, so complete, that it was almost a work of art. She wasn't just rewriting history. She was terraforming it, creating a whole new landscape where she was my benevolent mentor. That's kind of you to say, I replied, my tone serene. One can never really know how things will turn out. I'm sure your husband feels the same way. Investment banking is such a volatile world. The pressure to maintain appearances, to project success, even when facing market headwinds, it must be immense. It was a shot in the dark, but a precisely calculated one. For a split second, a flicker of something cold and sharp passed through her eyes. Her smile tightened by a barely perceptible millimeter. The hand on my arm lost its warmth. I had hit something. She didn't know how I could possibly know anything about her husband's troubles, and that lack of data was terrifying to a creature like her. My husband is a master of his field, she said, her voice a little too sharp before smoothing over again. But you're right, success takes constant effort. She glanced towards the stage. Well, I have to go make sure everything is ready for your big moment. We're all dying to hear what you have to say. She gave my arm a final proprietary squeeze and glided away. Holy hell, Chloe whispered, her eyes wide. What was that? Did you see her face? You poked the bear. I merely presented her with an unexpected data point, I said calmly. Now she'll be processing that anomaly for the rest of an evening. She'll be off balance. It's important to properly calibrate your audience before a presentation. Soon, the lights began to dim. The DJ's music faded out. People began to move towards the round tables that filled the room. Genevieve, back in her element, stepped up to the podium on the small stage. A soft, warm spotlight illuminated her. Welcome, everyone, she began, her voice resonating with practiced charm. Welcome back, Northgate alumni. It is so wonderful to see all of you here tonight to celebrate 10 years of memories, friendship, and success. She continued for several minutes, delivering a speech filled with platitudes and inside jokes designed to reinforce the myth of their shared golden past. I watched her not as an old classmate, but as a predator watches its prey. She was laying the perfect foundation for me. She was warming up the crowd, making them feel good about themselves, making them feel part of a special, successful tribe. Then she turned to the main event. And now, she said, her voice swelling with importance, it is my distinct honor to introduce our guest speaker, a woman who truly embodies the spirit of excellence we all strive for. She was a brilliant student then, and she is a global leader in her field now. Her work is changing the world, and it all started right here, in the halls of Northgate High. Please join me in giving a huge, warm welcome to the pride of our class, Dr. Mara Vance. The room erupted in applause. It was a wave of sound, warm and inviting. They were applauding the illusion, the successful woman, the inspirational story they were about to hear. I stood up from my table. Chloe gave my hand a final supportive squeeze. I walked towards the stage, my steps even and unhurried. The spotlight found me, and I felt its warmth on my face. I could see the faces in the crowd, all turned towards me, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and anticipation. I saw Mark Renshaw trying to look proud. I saw Tiffany smiling vacantly, and I saw Genevieve stepping back from the podium, her face a mask of smug, self-congratulatory triumph. She thought this was her moment, her victory. She had brought the ghost back and tamed it, turning it into a show pony for her party. I reached the podium. I adjusted the microphone, the small sound echoing in the silent, expectant room. I looked out at the sea of faces, my audience, my subjects. My data set, I smiled. A calm, pleasant, analytical smile. Thank you, Genevieve, for that generous introduction, I began, my voice clear and steady. It's an honor to be here tonight. When I was asked to speak, I thought about what I could possibly share with you about success. And I realized that the most important lessons don't come from the successes. They come from our stories. And tonight, I'd like to tell you a few stories. The trap was set, the bait was taken, and the ghost in the machine was about to begin the performance of a lifetime. This response provides the next major installment of our collaborative novel, which encompasses the climactic speech. Delivered by the protagonist, Mara, the narrative details the execution of her meticulously planned psychological revenge and the immediate, chaotic aftermath. The applause was a wave of sound washing over me, warm, appreciative, and utterly oblivious. They were applauding the woman on the brochure, the successful alumna per Dr. Mara Vance. They had no idea they were about to be dissected by the ghost they had created. I looked out at the sea of faces, a landscape of my past, and I began. Thank you, I said again, my voice pitched to a frequency of calm authority. When I was asked to speak tonight, I thought about success. What is it? Is it the number in your bank account? The title on your business card? A curated feed of happy moments? I let the questions hang in the air, a gentle philosophical opening. I don't think so. I think success is about the stories we live, not the ones we tell, but the ones we live. So tonight, I'd like to share a few stories about people who taught me what success truly means. My eyes scanned the room and found him, Mark Renshaw. He was smiling, basking in the general warmth of the moment. He was my first target. I knew a young man in high school, I began, my tone warm and nostalgic. He was, for lack of a better word, a king. A star athlete, handsome, popular. The kind of person everyone assumed was destined for a corner office and a life of effortless victory. He had it all. I saw Mark puff his chest out just a little. He thought I was talking about him in a good way. He and everyone who knew him thought the same. The setup was complete, but life, as it often does, had a different plan, I continued, my voice taking on a more serious, empathetic tone. His path wasn't a straight line to the top. He faced setbacks. A business he poured his heart into failed. He had to take a job that some might see as humbling. Not the grand destiny everyone had predicted for him. I watched Mark's smile freeze and then begin to curdle at the edges. His wife, seated next to him, shifted uncomfortably, her gaze darting towards her husband. He knew, and he knew that I knew. But here, I said, my voice swelling with manufactured inspiration, is where he found his true success. He discovered that strength isn't about winning on a football field. It's about the quiet dignity of clocking in for a shift you don't want to provide for the family you love. He learned that a father's worth isn't measured in stock options, but in the bedtime stories he reads to his children. He is a greater man today, stocking shelves in a hardware store, than he ever was as the king of our hallways. And for that lesson in quiet, resilient strength, I am grateful. A smattering of polite, confused applause broke out. The story was uplifting on the surface, but the details were too specific. Mark was staring at his hands, his face a blotchy, mortified red. I had taken his private shame and turned it into a public parable. I had humiliated him under the guise of praising him. The first surgical strike was a success. I took a sip of water, letting the moment land. My eyes found my next subject, Tiffany, the woman who had greeted me with such empty enthusiasm. I knew a young woman as well, I said, my voice shifting to one of sisterly confidence. She was never the leader of the pack, but she was always close to the center of it. She was beautiful and funny, and she understood that in the complex social ecosystem of high school, belonging was a form of currency. Her allegiance was to the group. It was her shield and her identity. I could see Tiffany smiling, recognizing herself in the description, feeling seen. But that kind of safety has a cost, I went on, my voice becoming more reflective. The cost is often your own voice. The cost is the silence you keep when you see someone being isolated or ridiculed. It's the small quiet, act of looking away. Tiffany's smile vanished. Her eyes went wide with a dawning, horrified recognition. I could see the ghost of a memory flickering behind them, perhaps the image of a girl with yogurt in her hair. But that young woman also learned a valuable lesson as she grew up, I said, bringing the story to its uplifting poisonous conclusion. She learned that the validation you get from a crowd is like cotton candy, sweet and then gone. But the validation you get from your own conscience, from the quiet act of offering a kind word to someone who needs it, that is the bread that sustains you for a lifetime. Her story taught me that true belonging isn't about fitting in. It's about having the courage to stand out. And for that, I am grateful. The applause was a little more confident. This time, the moral was clearer, but Tiffany was pale. She was looking around, wondering who else knew, who else remembered her silence. I had retroactively judged her and found her wanting in front of all her peers. Now, it was time, the main event. I turned my gaze slowly, deliberately, until it rested on the guest of honor's table, on Genevieve. She was watching me with a new, guarded expression. The comment about her husband had unnerved her. She was no longer a proud host. She was a rival, trying to figure out my game. She had no idea the game was already over. And finally, I said, my voice becoming rich with admiration, I want to talk about the kind of success we all dream of, the kind that seems truly flawlessly perfect. I began to describe her life, her public life, without ever using her name. I painted a masterpiece of her existence. I know a woman who, by every metric, has achieved it all, I began. She married well to a powerful, successful man. She has beautiful, healthy children. She lives in a home that looks like it belongs in a magazine. She dedicates her time to prestigious charities, and she chairs committees. She is a pillar of her community. She is a testament to the fact that you can, indeed, have it all. When we look at a life like that, so perfectly curated, so elegantly presented, it's easy to feel a sense of awe. I could see Genevieve relax. Her shoulders, which had been tense, lowered. A slow, confident smile returned to her face. This was what she had been waiting for, her public coronation. Her rival, the ghost, was now validating her entire existence in front of everyone. She glanced at her husband, a smug, triumphant look on her face. I had built the pedestal as high as it could possibly go. Now it was time to kick it out from under her. I paused, taking another sip of water, letting the image of Genevieve's perfect life saturate the room. Then I leaned into the microphone, my voice becoming intimate, confidential, as if I were sharing a profound secret. But the most important lesson this incredible woman's story teaches us, I said, my voice soft and laced with a terrible, hidden pity, is about architecture. It teaches us that the most beautiful, glittering facades often require the most complex and sometimes unstable foundations. Genevieve's smile froze. Absolutely, perfectly froze. It teaches us about the immense hidden pressures of maintenance, the quiet daily battle to keep every surface polished, to hide any cracks that may appear in the bedrock. It teaches us that the most successful-looking ventures, whether in business or in life, can be threatened by a single, Unforeseen federal investigation. I let those words drop like stones into a perfectly still pond. Her husband flinched, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement, but I saw it. Genevieve's face had gone ashen. It teaches us that personal integrity is the only currency. That never loses its value. That true success isn't about the parties you host or the vacations you take. It's about being able to look at yourself in the mirror when the house is quiet and the guests are gone and be at peace with the person you see. I was speaking to the entire room, but my words were aimed at her soul. I was narrating her deepest, most private fears. The rehab stays disguised as wellness retreats. The nanny with the lawsuit, the terror of her husband's impending doom. This woman, this paragon of success, is the most powerful inspiration of all, I concluded, my voice ringing with a triumphant, terrible sincerity. Because her beautiful life reminds us all to focus on our own foundations, to build our lives on things that are real, honesty, empathy, and a quiet, unshakable courage. Let us all aspire to a success as profound and meaningful as hers. I looked directly at her. Her face was a mask of utter horror. Her illusion was shattered. I had not accused her of anything. I had praised her. I had praised the ideal she pretended to be, while simultaneously holding up a mirror to the ugly truth of what she was. And I had done it in a way that left her no room to object, no room to fight back. To deny my praise would be to admit her own hypocrisy. She was trapped, utterly and completely. Thank you, I said simply, and I stepped back. From the podium, for a moment there was stunned silence, and then the room erupted in applause, louder and more sincere than before. They were clapping for the beautiful, inspirational message. They were clapping for the ideals of honesty and integrity. They were, without knowing it, applauding the complete and total annihilation of their queen. I walked calmly from the stage, my face serene. I ignored the people trying to shake my hand, to congratulate me on my wonderful speech. I found Chloe, who was staring at me as if I had just sprouted wings and horns. Her mouth was hanging open. "Oh my God, Mara," she whispered. "That was a war crime." "It was a speech about inspirational stories," I replied, my voice even. But my eyes were on Genevieve. She was on her feet. Her husband was grabbing her arm, trying to restrain her, his face pale with fury and panic. But she shook him off. Her face was no longer a mask of horror. It was a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. Her perfect facade was gone, and the monster I remembered from high school was finally showing its face to the world. She started moving toward me, pushing through the confused and clapping crowd. Her eyes were locked on mine. The party was over, and the final confrontation was about to begin. This response provides the final, concluding installment of our collaborative novel. The narrative begins with the immediate, explosive confrontation following Mara's speech and follows through to the resolution of her story, exploring the aftermath of her revenge and her vision for the future. The applause was a physical barrier between us. The Genevieve's rage was a force of nature that parted it like a tidal wave. People turned, their happy, drunken conversations faltering as they saw the look on her face. Her husband, a man named Sterling who looked like a walking personification of old money, grabbed her arm. "Jen, don't," he hissed, his face pale with panic. She ripped her arm from his grasp. "Don't touch me," she snarled, her voice a low, ugly thing that bore no resemblance to the charming hostess from moments before. She reached me and Chloe, who had instinctively stepped half in front of me, a loyal, feudal shield. Genevieve's eyes were blazing, her perfectly painted mask of civility completely gone. "You," she breathed, her voice shaking with a fury so profound it was almost silent. "You pathetic little ghost." What did you think you were doing? I kept my expression placid, my heart rate steady. I was no longer the terrified girl in the high school hallway. I had the data. I had control. I was delivering the inspirational speech the committee invited me to give. I said calmly, I'm sorry if some of the themes didn't resonate with you personally. Don't you play dumb with me? She spat, her voice rising in volume, drawing more and more attention. The DJ had faded the music out completely. We were the only show in town. You stood up there and you talked about my life, my husband, my family. I tilted my head, feigning gentle confusion. This was the crucial part of the algorithm, forcing her to self-identify. Genevieve, I'm not sure I understand. My final story was about a hypothetical woman who teaches us the importance of having a strong, honest foundation. Why did you hear that story and assume it was about you? The question hung in the air, a perfectly crafted trap. The crowd murmured. I had just laid out the accusation and the defense in one simple, devastating question. 2. Answer it, she would have to admit that the shoe fit, that her foundations were unstable, that she was hiding secrets. Her face contorted. She was trapped, and she knew it. The rage, having no logical outlet, simply boiled over. You think you're so clever, don't you? Hiding in your lab, playing with your little brain waves. You were nothing in high school, and you're nothing now. Just a bitter, lonely little freak who never got over it. The insults were a flurry of poorly aimed blows. They might have wounded the girl I used to be, but they couldn't touch the woman I had become. I didn't even flinch. You seem very upset, Genevieve, I said, my tone one of detached, clinical concern. It was a speech about finding strength in adversity. I'm sorry it's had this effect on you. Her husband, Sterling, grabbed her again, his face a mask of cold fury. Shut up, Jen, he ordered in a low, vicious tone. You're making a scene. You're making it worse. The words federal investigation were a bomb that had gone off in his own life, and he was watching his wife stupidly dance in the fallout. Genevieve turned her rage on him. Don't you tell me what to do. This is her fault. She turned back to me, her finger pointing, her entire body trembling. Her, and that's how they all saw her, their queen. Their reunion chair. A screaming, unhinged woman, viciously attacking the poised, calm guest of honor who had just delivered a moving speech about integrity. In the space of 5 minutes, with her own words and her own rage, she had destroyed a lifetime of carefully curated social capital. My work was done. She had detonated the bomb herself. Chloe, I said quietly, turning my back on Genevieve completely, I think we're ready to leave. My dismissal was the final blow. It was a public declaration of her irrelevance. As Chloe and I turned to walk away, Sterling began to physically drag his shrieking wife toward the exit. To the stunned, silent stares of 100 former classmates, the myth of Genevieve Dubois was over. I had given them a new story to tell about her. It would be the one they'd remember for the next 10 years. We walked out of the ballroom, leaving a black hole of social chaos in our wake. The silence in the elevator was profound. It wasn't until we were in the back of a taxi, speeding away from the hotel, that Chloe finally spoke. Okay, she said, her voice shaky but filled with a kind of electric awe. New plan. We're definitely getting tacos. And you are going to explain to me how you managed to perform a complete psychological assassination without raising your voice. I leaned my head back against the cool leather of the seat. A wave of exhaustion, deep and profound, washed over me. The hypervigilance, the cold focus, the years of repressed anger, it was all just gone. It had been expended, leaving behind a vast, quiet stillness. It wasn't an assassination, I said, my voice tired. It was a data analysis. I just presented my findings. We didn't talk about it again that night. We ate tacos at a 24-hour diner, and we talked about Chloe's job and a stupid movie she had seen. And for the first time in a decade, my mind was quiet. The ghost was gone. I had returned to the haunted house, turned on all the lights, and explained in clear, clinical terms that the monster in the closet was just a sad, frightened woman with a crumbling foundation. And then I'd walked out and locked the door behind me. The next morning, I saw the digital fallout. A news alert about Sterling's investment firm, the federal investigation now public. Genevieve's social media accounts were all deactivated. She had vanished. The queen had abdicated her throne. My final report was complete. A week later, I was on a plane heading east. The lights of the North American continent gave way to the vast, dark blanket of the Pacific Ocean. My work was taking me back to the Philippines, to a new project my firm was spearheading in Western Visayas. A world away from the petty dramas of Northgate High. I had my laptop open, but I wasn't looking at financial data or risk analysis. I was looking at the preliminary framework for a new program, a program designed to use neurolinguistic modeling to help young people, especially victims of bullying, reframe their internal narratives. It was a system to help them find their own voice, to build a new, resilient foundation based not on external validation, but on internal strength. It was complex, challenging, and deeply meaningful work. I thought about the girl who loved Gothic literature, who poured her soul into a notebook only to have it destroyed. For 10 years, I had channeled her pain into ambition, her humiliation into a relentless drive for a cold and calculating revenge. The revenge was complete. It had been a masterpiece of its kind, but it was a closed loop, a finished project. Now, for the first time, I could use my skills not to deconstruct, but to build, not to punish, but to heal. The flight attendant came by, asking if I needed anything. I looked up from my screen, out the window at the dawn breaking. Over the Philippine Sea, the light was brilliant, clean, new. No, thank you, I said, a genuine smile reaching my eyes. I have everything I need. My name is Dr. Mara Vance, and I was finally writing my own story, and it was going to be an inspiration. For the first time in my adult life, the primary motivator of my existence was not the past, it was the present. A fragile, vibrant, and deeply meaningful present, rooted here in the humid air and rich soil of Cybalong. The ghost of Northgate High had been exorcised in a hotel ballroom, and in its place, I was carefully cultivating a new life, one defined by purpose rather than revenge. My firm's philanthropic project, the Launchpad Initiative, had established its first pilot program here. We worked with bright, underprivileged youth, using the same neuro-linguistic principles I had once weaponized to now build confidence, teach advanced communication skills, and help them recode the limiting internal narratives that poverty and hardship had ingrained in them. My days were long and challenging, filled with mentoring sessions, curriculum development, and collaboration with our small, dedicated local team, led by a wonderfully pragmatic woman named Isabel. The work was real. It was tangible. And for the first time, the analytical engine in my mind was being used to build, not to deconstruct. Reunion speech had, against my intentions, taken on a life of its own. A recording, likely from a guest's phone, had found its way online. It went viral in a small, specific way, echoing through alumni networks, tech circles, and online forums dedicated to stories of justice. I was a minor, anonymous celebrity, the podium ghost, the woman who had performed a psychological assassination with a smile. Chloe sent me the articles and comment threads, which I read with a detached curiosity. Most saw it as a triumphant story of empowerment. A few, however, painted me as a monster, a cold, vindictive sociopath, I ignored both, focusing on my work. The past was a closed case file. It had no bearing on my present. That was my first mistake. I had forgotten the most basic rule of data analysis. Every action, no matter how contained, creates an echo. And sometimes that echo attracts predators. Subble began subtly, a series of bureaucratic snags. Permits for our new community center were inexplicably delayed by the municipal government. A grant from a local foundation that had been a sure thing was suddenly reevaluated and denied. Isabel, my local project lead, was frustrated but philosophical. "This is how things sometimes work here, Mara," she told me, her brow furrowed with worry. "You have to have patience. Things move on their own time." But I didn't believe in things moving on their own time. I believed in cause and effect. And this felt like an effect without a visible cause. It was a deliberate external pressure being applied to my project. I tasked Chloe, my eyes and ears back in the States, with some discreet digging. Then came the second wave. A series of articles and blog posts began appearing online, not on major news sites, but on the murky fringes of the internet. They were sophisticated, well-written smear pieces. They twisted the words from my speech, painting me as a dangerously manipulative figure. They claimed my philanthropic work was a front, a sociopathic experiment on vulnerable youth. They used my expertise in neuro-linguistic programming against me, suggesting I was brainwashing children. The articles were anonymous, but they were amplified by a network of bots, their poison slowly seeping into the search results for my name and our initiative. "This isn't random, Mara." Chloe's voice was tense over our encrypted line. "This is a professional hit job. This EO poisoning, the bot network that's pushing these stories, this costs money. A lot of money. Someone is trying to systematically destroy your reputation." The final piece of the puzzle arrived that evening. Two of our most promising students, teenagers I had been personally mentoring, came to me in tears. Their families had forbidden them from continuing with the program. A local community leader, a man who had previously been one of our most vocal supporters, had visited their homes. He had shown their parents the anonymous articles. He had warned them that our program was a dangerous foreign influence and that their children would be better off staying away. This was no longer a digital smear campaign. The ghost in the machine now had a face on the ground here in Cybalom. Someone was turning the community against us. The cold, familiar feeling of being systematically isolated, a feeling I hadn't felt since high school, began to creep back in. But this time, it wasn't my social life at stake. It was my life's work, and the futures of the children I had promised to help. That night, sleep was impossible. I sat in my small, sparsely furnished apartment, the sounds of geckos chirping outside the window, a stark contrast to the silent, digital war that had been declared on me. This wasn't Genevieve. The scale of this, the resources required, were far beyond a disgraced suburbanite. This was a different class of enemy. Someone with immense power, wealth, and a deep, personal motivation to see me fail. I put my skills to work. Chloe and I began a deep dive, a forensic analysis of the attack. We traced the bot, networks, the server hosting the articles, the money trail behind the domains. It was a labyrinth, designed by experts to be untraceable. But just like my speech, my methods were unconventional. I wasn't just looking for technical footprints. I was looking for a psychological profile. What kind of person would orchestrate this? What was their motivation? The tone of the articles was key. They were filled with a specific kind of righteous fury, a hatred for public shaming, a vitriol for what they called trial by social media. The author wasn't just attacking me. They were attacking the very idea of me. The podium ghost. "I'm running a cross-reference," I told Chloe, my fingers flying across the keyboard. "Searching for powerful individuals, CEOs, Politicians who have been the subject of a high-profile public takedown in the last few years. Someone with the resources, the motive, and a demonstrated history of aggressive retaliation. The algorithm churned through terabytes of data, and then a name emerged. A single powerful hit. Alistair Finch. Alistair Finch was a titan of the tech world, a self-made billionaire with a reputation for genius and a notoriously volcanic temper. 2 years ago, he had been the subject of a devastating expose by an investigative journalist, revealing his company's brutal labor practices and his own history of verbal abuse. The story went viral. Finch was publicly humiliated, forced to step down as CEO, and became a poster child for toxic leadership. Since then, he had dedicated a significant portion of his vast fortune to a quiet, vicious war against the journalist who exposed him and anyone else he considered part of the digital mob. "I found him, Chloe," I whispered, a chill tracing its way down my spine. "Alistair Finch. He has a shell corporation that specializes in reputation management. It's a front. I'm tracking its financial outflows, and I've just found a series of payments to a political consultant here in the Western Visayas, the local community leader who had turned our supporters against us. He hadn't done it out of conviction. He had been paid. This was Finch's doing. He had seen my story, seen me as another agent of the public shaming that had ruined him, and he had decided to make me his next project. He was going to dismantle my life, not with a speech, but with the cold, crushing weight of his fortune. I felt a surge of fury so pure and intense it almost made me dizzy. I had fought my way out of one hell, only to find myself in the crosshairs of a far more powerful devil. A man who saw me not as a person, but as a symbol to be destroyed. My phone buzzed. It was Isabel. "Mara, you need to see this," she said, her voice tight with panic. She sent me a link to a local news blog. The headline was in English: "Foreign-funded youth program in Cyberlam under investigation by provincial government for irregularities." The article was full of anonymous quotes and baseless accusations, citing the same smear pieces I had seen online. It named me personally. It named our initiative. Finch wasn't just turning the community against me. He was using his influence to bring the weight of the government down on us. He was methodically, systematically, and expertly boxing me in. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the dark, sleeping town. For a moment, I felt a tremor of real fear. Genevieve and her cohort were children playing with matches. This man was an arsonist with an ocean of gasoline at his disposal. He could and would burn my entire world to the ground. But then the fear subsided, replaced by the familiar, cold resolve that had carried me through the darkest days of my life. The ghost was stirring. I had spent the last year trying to bury her, to build a new life on top of her grave. But now I understood. The ghost was not my enemy. She was my weapon. She was the part of me that knew how to analyze a predator, how to find its weaknesses, how to survive. Alistair Finch had made a critical error. He thought he was hunting a symbol. He had no idea he was hunting a mirror. He was a bully, just a bigger, wealthier version of the ones I had already defeated. And I knew, better than anyone, how to bring a bully to his knees. "Chloe," I said into my encrypted line, my voice calm and clear, "I need everything you can find on Finch's corporate infrastructure. His data security protocols, his server locations, his personal, digital habits. Everything. What are you going to do, Mara?" She asked, her voice laced with fear. "When I was a girl," I said, looking out at the darkness, "I wrote a report on Gothic literature. I learned that the grandest, most imposing castles always have the deepest, darkest dungeons. And Mr. Finch, he's built himself a very, very grand castle." I smiled, a cold, sharp smile that felt like an old, familiar friend. "I'm going to go exploring." This response provides the final installment of the four-part sequel to Mara's story. It details her counteroffensive against a powerful new enemy, the escalation of the conflict, and the ultimate resolution that defines her character's final transformation. The hunt began in the quiet humidity of a Cybelom night. While the town slept under a blanket of stars, I was at war. My small apartment became a command center, my laptop a weapon system. Alistair Finch's corporate empire, Finch Magnetics, was a digital fortress, a world away from the petty online histories of my former classmates. This was not a playground. This was a military-grade installation protected by layers of security that were themselves works of art. Chloe was my only battalion. From her apartment in Chicago, she worked in perfect synchronicity with me. I was the strategist, analyzing the architecture, identifying potential weaknesses from a psychological and systemic perspective. She was the operative, deploying the code, running the scripts, probing the outer defenses. His ego is the vulnerability. I typed in our encrypted chat. Finch built this. He'll have a backdoor, a master key, something only he knows about because he can't stand the idea of any system being beyond his personal control. It won't be labeled backdoor. It will be disguised as a legacy protocol, an obsolete diagnostic tool he insisted on keeping. For days we worked. We slept in shifts, our world shrinking to the glow of our screens. During the day, I would go to the community center, projecting an aura of calm I did not feel for Isabel and our students. The pressure on the ground was escalating. Men in crisp, ill-fitting barongs, local government bureaucrats, arrived with official-looking documents. They conducted an audit, disrupting our classes, questioning our students, treating our initiative like a crime scene. Isabel handled them with a quiet, steely grace, but I could see the fear in her eyes. Finch's invisible hand was closing around us. One evening, as I walked home, a motorcycle without license plates swerved dangerously close to me, its rider's face obscured by a dark helmet. It was a clear, unambiguous message. My physical safety was no longer guaranteed. The digital war now had the potential for real-world kinetic consequences. The streets of the peaceful town I had chosen as my sanctuary now felt charged with menace. The breakthrough came at 3 a.m. on the 5th day. It was exactly as I had predicted. A ghost protocol buried deep in the servers. Maintenance code designed to give a single user root access for emergency diagnostics. It was a piece of digital vanity left behind by Finch. We were in. The inside of Finch Magnetic servers was a universe of data. Financial records, research and development files, private corporate communications. It was too much to sift through randomly. I needed to know what I was looking for. Finch's great secret. The dungeon beneath his castle. Focus on his most profitable, least public division, I instructed Chloe. Look for data transfers that are heavily encrypted and routed through shell companies. He's hiding something, and it will be connected to his greatest source of revenue. Chloe found it within an hour. A project codenamed Chimera. At first glance, it looked like a data analytics service for corporate clients. But as we peeled back the layers of encryption, the horrifying truth revealed itself. Finch was using his company's enterprise software, trusted by hundreds of multinational corporations, to create a secret, secondary data stream. He was illegally harvesting proprietary information, trade secrets, financial strategies, and personnel data from his own clients. He was selling this priceless information to the highest bidders on the black market, rival corporations, rogue states, insider traders. He hadn't just built a company. He had built the most powerful corporate espionage machine in history. The sheer scale of the criminality was breathtaking. This wasn't just a scandal. It was an extinction-level event for his company. It was decades in prison. It was the kind of secret that men like Finch would kill to protect. And I had it, all of it, sitting on a secured, encrypted server of my own. I had the weapon. My God, Mara, Chloe's message flashed on my screen. You can destroy him. You can leak this to the press. It'll be bigger than the reunion. You can do a speech about him. I looked at her words, and for a moment, the old Mara, the podium ghost, considered it. I imagined the press conference, the public shaming, the beautiful, brutal spectacle of watching another bully burn in the light of public humiliation. It would be a glorious, triumphant revenge. But my own recent history scrolled past my eyes. That path, the path of public revenge, was what had led Finch to my doorstep. It was a self-perpetuating cycle of violence, a war that would never end. To destroy Finch publicly would be to create another global headline, another story that would define me, another target on my back for the next monster who felt aggrieved. It was a hollow victory. My goal was not to punish Finch. My goal was to live in peace. And peace was not won through public executions. It was won by ending the threat, silently and permanently. No, I typed back to Chloe. No speech, no press. A public spectacle is his arena. I'm not going to fight him on his terms. I took a deep breath. My path forward was clear. It was the path of the analyst, not the avenger. We're not going to humiliate him. We're going to liquidate him. Over the next 12 hours, I assembled 3 packages of data. Each one was identical, containing the irrefutable proof of Project Chimera. Each was tailored for a specific recipient. I was not carpet bombing the media. This was a series of targeted surgical strikes. Package 1 I sent anonymously to the chair of the U.S. Senate Commerce Committee, a notoriously ambitious regulator who had been looking for a major tech scalp for years. Package 2 I sent to the 3 members of the Finch Magnetics board of directors who had recently tried and failed to oust Alistair in a power struggle. I was giving them the ammunition for a corporate coup. The 3rd package, the most important one, I sent to my contact at the European Commission's Directorate General for Competition. They were the most powerful and feared data protection agency in the world, with the power to levy fines in the billions. I knew from my professional life that they were relentless and incorruptible. They were the true executioners. Then I closed my laptop. I erased every trace of our intrusion, and I waited. The effect was not immediate. It was a quiet, creeping paralysis. 2 days later, Isabel came to me, a look of profound confusion on her face. The provincial government office called, she said. They've indefinitely suspended their investigation into our program. They cited procedural errors. A week after that, the local community leader who had been paid to slander us publicly issued a retraction, claiming he had been misled by foreign business interests. He looked terrified. The pressure was gone. It had simply vanished. Then the global news began to trickle in. Alistair Finch had abruptly stepped down as CEO of Finch Magnetics, citing personal health reasons. A week later, the company announced it was under a massive internal review and was cooperating with federal and international regulators. The stock plummeted. There was no mention of Project Chimera, no mention of me. The world saw a corporate titan fall. Only Chloe and I knew who had pushed him. Months later, I was sitting on a woven mat on the floor of our community center in Cybelum. The sun streamed through the open windows, carrying the scent of salt and flowers. The room was filled with the bright, energetic chatter of our students as they worked in groups, practicing their debate skills. Isabel was laughing at something one of the kids had said. The Launchpad initiative was thriving. It was real. My phone buzzed. A message from Chloe. It was a link to a major news outlet. The headline read, Alistair Finch indicted on multiple counts of corporate fraud and conspiracy. There was a picture of him looking gray and diminished, flanked by lawyers. I looked at the image for a long moment. I felt no triumph, no satisfaction. I just felt quiet. I archived the message and put my phone away. One of the students, a fiercely intelligent 16-year-old girl named Leica, came over to me. "Dr. Mara," she said, "can you help me with my closing statement? I want to make sure it's powerful." I looked at her bright, hopeful face, at the future she was building for herself right here in this room. The revenge that had defined my life for a decade had given me the skills to tear a world down. But this, I realized, was the true purpose of those skills. Not to destroy, but to build. Not to take power, but to give it away to those who had none. "Of course, Leica," I said, and my smile was genuine and light and free. "Let's make it unforgettable."